If you love somebody enough, you'll follow wherever they go. That's how I got to Memphis. But how did a certain style of wrestling go from one Tennessee city to spread throughout the entire world? Well, that's what we're about to find out. Because today, there are still active Patreon polls up right now, so why don't you go over and sign up on my Patreon page so you have the ability to vote, just like Jesus Farrow, Mr. Woos, and Jess K. Go ahead and get your voice heard on the future of this channel, and to everyone who is supporting me already, thank you so much. The Continental Wrestling Association, also sometimes simply known as the Memphis territory, just like so many other wrestling promotions, all begin with the NWA. The story begins when Roy Welch started promoting in the greater Memphis area. He would soon be joined by Nick Gulas, who had previously been a promoter in Florida. Together, they formed Gulas Welch Enterprises Incorporated, which promoted shows throughout Tennessee and Kentucky. They would eventually partner up with Joe Gunter, who had been promoting out of Birmingham, Alabama, allowing them to expand into the state. From here, they would also begin doing sporadic shows in states like Mississippi, Ohio, and Georgia. Then, once the National Wrestling Alliance formed, they knew a good thing when they saw it, quickly signing on to become known as the NWA Mid-America. A few years later, John Kazana would join up with them, giving them Knoxville, Tennessee as another major city to add to their turf. And since they already had major cities such as Memphis, Nashville, and Chattanooga, Tennessee was now definitely NWA country. Also, around this time, a recently divorced woman named Christine Teeny Jarrett would take on a job doing ticket sales in order to support her family, which included her young son, who at the age of 7 would begin working for the promotion himself, handing out programs. Who was that son? Well, he was Jerry Jarrett, but we will be getting more into him in just a little bit. Now, throughout the years to come, the territory would gain a strong following for tag team wrestling, with some shows only featuring one singles bout on the entire card. Tag team wrestling had become so prevalent for the territory that they had to create a whole slew of tag belts just to satisfy the division. And who could blame them, since they had so many big name teams at their disposal, such as the Von Brauners, the Bounty Hunters, the Fabulous Kangaroos, the Fabulous Fargos, as well as Jim White and Jerry Lawler. However, all this would change in the mid-1970s. The company would switch over to focusing more on singles bouts, with Nick Gulas heavily featuring his own son George, having him go over larger opponents and veterans of the ring without really paying his dues. In addition to this, Gulas would also screw Jerry Jarrett out of a deal where he thought he was buying into the company. Jerry was naturally furious and decided to leave the promotion and start his own, the Continental Wrestling Association. Now initially, many wrestlers, despite any frustrations, decided to stay loyal to Gulas. However, there was one wrestler who decided to go the other way and join Jarrett. That wrestler was Jerry Lawler. Before this, Jackie Fargo was considered to be the big star in Tennessee, but after defeating him in 1975 to become the king of wrestling, Jerry Lawler would dethrone him and become the new top earner for the entire territory. Now, going back to the split, initially, Gulas and Jarrett would simply separate Tennessee, with Gulas taking Nashville and Jarrett claiming the Cook Convention Center in Memphis. Of course, their turf did expand beyond that, with the CWA getting places like Evansville, Indiana, and Louisville, Kentucky, among others. In addition to this, another major plus for the CWA was that very early on, Jarrett had them made as an official NWA affiliate, giving them the advantages of working under the National Wrestling Alliance and even having access to the NWA World Champion. So, with the battle lines being drawn and the CWA also having the backing of the NWA as well as having the headliner Jerry Lawler, despite all of Gulas' efforts, in about 3 short years, the NWA Mid-America folded, with Jerry Jarrett buying up what was left. From there, the CWA was unstoppable, with their megastar Jerry Lawler pretty much being a license to print money. The company became really known for their Monday night shows long before Raw or Nitro ever aired, as they would regularly sell out the Mid-South Coliseum, which holds over 10,000 people, no small accomplishment for sure. In addition to this, the CWA would also hold other very successful shows throughout their entire territory, as well as having a highly rated Saturday morning television show filmed at the WMC TV studios in Memphis, hosted by Dave Brown and Lance Russell. In terms of television, the CWA drew unprecedented TV ratings for professional wrestling during this time, and Lawler was just so popular that it was hard for any other wrestlers to get over in the territory because fans just couldn't get enough of the king. And for good reason, but this is exactly where I think Memphis wrestling really shines, because the classic Memphis style match and promo has influenced all of professional wrestling throughout the entire world, even to this day. Now, what is Memphis Style Wrestling? Well, it primarily focused on storytelling with a less is more kind of mentality. Now, don't get me wrong, these guys could definitely go, but in the end, they really understood it was about the emotions they could invoke in the audience that mattered more than any maneuver ever could. As a result, you would see a lot of tried and true but basic moves, and while this might not sound like the most impressive of movesets, remember, it does indeed serve a purpose. Because when they did bigger moves, like pile drivers, it had so much more weight and impact to it. It wasn't watered down by being just one move out of 1,000 complex and hard-hitting stunts being shoved all into one match. But furthermore, it got many fans invested because the wrestlers understood that what you do in the ring is just a matter of facilitating an emotional response from the fans. So the next level of antagonism would usually involve the heel either avoiding the babyface or cheating or both, building up the anticipation to see the babyface finally get to clobber the heel, as the goal for the bad guys was to be as despicable as possible. However, Memphis never forgot that being loathed was always done for a reason. Because generating heat for heat's sake wasn't the point, the goal was always to get the babyface over and endear him with the crowd. If they hate the heel, they'll love the babyface by default. And if you did your job as a heel correctly, then the babyface would be over and the crowd would be fully satisfied watching him defeat you, and they would do that by out-wrestling you, outsmarting you, and triumphing over any of your cheap tactics. And this formula would be used very effectively all throughout the promotion, with one feud in particular being extremely successful. The feud of Jarrett, Lawler, and Jimmy Hart. Hart would routinely bring in members of his first family to try and take down the King. The Iron Sheik, Jesse Ventura, and even a young Hulk Hogan, not to mention many others, were all brought in to try to take down Lawler. This feud would eventually come to an end when Hart signed with the WWF, where he would bring his style along with him. And this mentality for heel managers would have its influence spread throughout the entire World Wrestling Federation, and even going beyond and inspiring other talents like Gato in New Japan. And Memphis Style went even further with this with their promos, especially when it came to their studio shows. Heel promos in the CWA were personal and biting and went for getting as much heat with words as they possibly could from moves. And this method of in-your-face verbal attacks would be borrowed everywhere from ECW to WWF and again Hulk Hogan when he turned heel in WCW. But out of all the wrestlers to master this methodology, how could I not mention the absolute all-star, Andy Kaufman. Now, this angle could get a video all unto itself, so I'm just going to briefly go over it. Comedian and actor Andy Kaufman would wrestle women in the Mid-South Coliseum, and he would antagonize the people of Memphis. That is, until the local hero Jerry Lawler would eventually stand up to Kaufman, tired of him making a mockery of pro wrestling. This led to a match between the two of them when Lawler hit Kaufman with not one but two pile drivers, which were kayfabe banned at the time. Kaufman then sold a work injury, wearing a neck brace everywhere he went, never breaking kayfabe, and even threatening to sue Lawler over it. The mainstream media got wind of this, and the story spread like wildfire, peaking in exposure when the two met on David Letterman. So, while there are many people like me who have nothing but disdain for celebrities being involved in pro wrestling overall, there is no denying that Kaufman was an absolute genius, as Kaufman is one of the few who really got it, and is definitely one of the most important workers in all of wrestling's history, which really does kind of sum up everything nicely, because even though they did things like using lots of punches or involving celebrities in high-profile matches, they still managed to pull in even the harshest wrestling critics, because Memphis Wrestling is just that good. But then, after the feud with Kaufman ended, the CWA would start working with other promotions like the AWA and so on. This would ultimately result in the end of the Continental Wrestling Association. But for this story, that's gonna have to wait till another episode. Well, there you have it, some of the history behind the CWA, and hopefully now you can see why so many people just love the promotion and this style of wrestling. Because you'll go where your heart wants to go, and that's how I got to Memphis. I want to give a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters out there, and I also want to remind you there is still time to vote on this month's polls, so go ahead and do that if you haven't already. And if you want to sign up for my Patreon just like these fine folks right here, I highly encourage you to do so, and I really do appreciate all of the support. And if you want to go ahead and give a like to this video and subscribe to this channel, I would really appreciate that too. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, Dave knows.